The 1970s didn't just bend the rules of cinema, they threw them through a plate glass window. While studios cranked out safe blockbusters, a wave of American exploitation filmmakers dove headfirst into grit, grime, and downright jaw-dropping audacity. These weren't polite midnight flicks. They were cinematic bar fights. So, how many of these infamously dirty, boundary-breaking films can you handle before tapping out? Let's find out. Bring a strong stomach. You'll need it. 1. The Last House on the Left, 1972. If mainstream horror was the haunted house on the hill, The Last House on the Left was the abandoned shack deep in the woods that no one wanted to talk about. Wes Craven's debut came out swinging with a raw, unpolished style that felt more like a news report gone wrong than a movie. Shot on a shoestring budget, it told the story of two suburban girls whose night out spirals into a nightmare at the hands of a gang of criminals. What made this film infamous wasn't just the violence, it was the way it stripped away any cinematic comfort. The editing was jagged, the performances disturbingly authentic, and the soundtrack bounced from light-hearted folk to moments of absolute dread, creating emotional whiplash. Audiences in 1972 weren't prepared for that kind of tonal gut punch. Adding to its notoriety, the film's marketing leaned into the chaos. The infamous tagline, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie," became both a dare and a warning. Censors hacked away at it in different states, with some theaters refusing to show it altogether. Yet, for all its grime, Craven slipped in moments of social commentary, holding a cracked mirror up to a country wrestling with violence at home and abroad. By the end, you're not left cheering the revenge, you're left staring at the wreckage, wondering if justice was worth the cost. Last House didn't just open the door for grittier horror, it kicked it off the hinges and set it on fire. 2. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few titles have sparked as many heated debates as I Spit on Your Grave. Written and directed by Mir Zarchi, the film follows a young writer who retreats to a rural cabin to work, only to find herself at the center of a prolonged ordeal that pushes her to the edge. What follows is a revenge story that doesn't flinch, doesn't soften, and doesn't give the audience any easy catharsis. Unlike the slick thrillers of the era, I Spit on Your Grave was shot with a gritty, almost documentary-like realism. The rural setting is sunlit and quiet, which only makes the cruelty that unfolds feel more jarring. Zarchi's camera lingers uncomfortably long on scenes, not to glorify them, but to trap the viewer in the moment, forcing them to feel the passage of time and the weight of what's happening. Critics tore it apart on release, calling it worthless and inhuman, while others defended it as an unflinching portrait of survival and retribution. It was banned outright in several regions, and even when it played, theaters often inserted disclaimers to prepare or scare off potential viewers. For all the outrage, the film gained a cult following, largely because it didn't follow traditional revenge movie beats. The protagonist doesn't deliver clever one-liners or walk away to applause. She dismantles her enemies with methodical, icy resolve. Whether you see it as exploitation at its most shameless or empowerment carved out of horror, I Spit on Your Grave refuses to fade quietly into film history. 3. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. If The Last House on the Left made you afraid of the woods, The Hills Have Eyes made you afraid of open space. Wes Craven's second major outing swapped suburban driveways for the dusty, sun-bleached deserts of Nevada, where a stranded family discovers they're being hunted by a clan of cannibalistic outcasts. The result? A survival story where the heat feels oppressive, the rocks feel sharp, and there's nowhere to run. The genius and terror of The Hills Have Eyes lies in its setting. Craven used the desolate Mojave landscapes like a weapon, turning every crag and shadow into a possible hiding spot for danger. The film's family dynamic starts off almost sitcom-like, which makes the later descent into primal violence hit harder. Budget constraints actually worked in the film's favor. The rough, almost handmade quality gave it a texture that glossy Hollywood thrillers couldn't match. Michael Berryman's unforgettable look, a mix of physical uniqueness and piercing menace, cemented the film's place in exploitation history. It wasn't just gore that shocked audiences, it was the reversal of roles. By the end, the supposedly civilized family is as brutal and unrelenting as their attackers. Craven wasn't shy about the metaphor: strip away comfort and order, and everyone is capable of savagery. The Hills Have Eyes didn't just scare people, it made them look at themselves differently. 4. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. Even in the anything-goes world of 70s exploitation, Blood-Sucking Freaks was the kid who got kicked out of the party for going too far. Directed by Joel M. Reed, it follows Sardu, a sadistic theater owner, and his assistant Ralphus as they stage grotesque performances for audiences who think it's all fake, until it isn't. This wasn't just a horror film, it was a provocation. Reed layered the movie with a mix of stage show absurdity and genuine cruelty, blurring the line between performance and reality in ways that left even seasoned grindhouse audiences unsettled. The production values are rock bottom, but that's part of its staying power. The cheap sets and overacted performances create a surreal fever dream quality. It's sleazy, yes, but also weirdly self-aware, occasionally breaking into absurd comedy before slamming the viewer back into shock territory. Controversy followed it everywhere. The MPAA slapped it with the dreaded X rating, and many theaters refused to screen it. Trauma eventually picked it up years later, embracing it as one of their most infamous titles. Love it or loathe it, Blood-Sucking Freaks is pure grindhouse DNA, trashy, unapologetic, and impossible to forget. It's the kind of movie you only recommend with a warning attached. 5. Fight for Your Life, 1977. If Last House on the Left rattled audiences with its raw brutality, Fight for Your Life took that concept and poured gasoline on it. Directed by Robert A. Endelson, this home invasion thriller pits a ruthless escaped convict and his gang against a preacher's family, trapping them in a siege that's as much verbal assault as physical. What makes this film infamous isn't just the violence, it's the relentless barrage of racial slurs and confrontational dialogue. Even in the anything-goes 70s, this was a shock to the system. The hateful tirades are so constant and intense that they become their own form of psychological warfare, leaving both characters and viewers exhausted. Banned in several countries, Fight for Your Life still managed to find an audience on the grindhouse circuit. It offered no soft landings. When revenge comes, it's as ugly and cathartic as the violence that sparked it. Despite its reputation, the film is surprisingly well acted for its budget, with William Sanderson delivering a villain so unlikable it's almost a challenge not to cheer his eventual downfall. The setting, a single-family home, amplifies the claustrophobia, making every scene feel like the walls are closing in. It's not a movie you enjoy in the traditional sense, it's one you endure and maybe admire afterward for its nerve. Fight for Your Life proves that in exploitation cinema, sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's a mouth. 6. Poor Pretty Eddie, 1975. Some exploitation films shock with gore, others with sheer audacity. Poor Pretty Eddie does both, wrapped in a Southern Gothic nightmare. Directed by Richard Robinson and David Worth, it follows Liz Weatherly, a glamorous singer whose car breaks down in a small backwoods town. She's taken in by a failed country musician named Eddie and his eccentric, unsettling community. What starts as hospitality quickly mutates into something far darker. The film's atmosphere is its weapon. The rural Georgia setting feels both sun-soaked and suffocating, with dusty roads, peeling paint, and a community that watches everything with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Shelley Winters delivers a memorably unhinged performance as Bertha, the innkeeper who's as delusional as she is dangerous. Visually, the movie has a strange beauty, part Americana, part fever dream. The pacing lulls you into thinking you know where it's going, only to veer into moments that are downright disturbing. While it was marketed under several alternate titles to different audiences, each cut retained its core blend of menace and small town. Decay. Poor Pretty Eddie stands out because it doesn't just throw its characters into a violent world, it traps them in it with no easy way out. It's exploitation with a layer of art house grime, leaving you unsettled long after the credits roll. 7th, Mondo, New York, 1979. If Poor Pretty Eddie traps you in rural menace, Mondo, New York throws you into the heart of urban chaos. This pseudo-documentary, directed by Harvey Keith, is less a traditional narrative and more a guided tour through the city's most extreme subcultures at the tail end of the 70s. Shot in a raw, street-level style, the film bounces from performance art to underground clubs, from fire eaters to sideshow acts. It's part voyeuristic thrill, part cultural time capsule, capturing a New York City that was filthy, vibrant, and dangerous all at once. There's no plot, just a series of encounters that blur the line between reality and performance. The soundtrack pulses with punk and new wave energy, underscoring the anarchic spirit of the city's fringe communities. Critics were baffled, unsure if it was an exploitation film disguised as a documentary or the other way around. Either way, it wasn't something you'd see on network TV. Mondo, New York works because it doesn't explain itself. It invites you to watch, to react, and maybe to question why you're watching in the first place. It's messy, chaotic, and completely unforgettable, much like the city it immortalizes. 8. Forced Entry, 1973. Forced Entry is the kind of film that feels like it was made in a rush, yet somehow manages to bottle the ugly, jittery paranoia of its era. Directed by Sean Costello, it follows a deeply disturbed Vietnam veteran who's traded combat zones for pumping gas at a lonely roadside station. But his post-war existence spirals into something far darker as he begins stalking and targeting women in the area, convinced he's carrying out some twisted personal mission. From the very first scene, the film reeks of grindhouse grit. The camera wobbles with handheld urgency, colors are washed out by harsh daylight, and the sound often seems ripped straight from the street, complete with the background noise of traffic and city hum. This isn't slick or cinematic, it's raw and invasive, like you've stumbled into something you shouldn't be seeing. That lack of polish works in its favor, creating the sense that anything could happen at any moment. The story isn't driven by plot twists or big reveals. Instead, it unfolds like a grim case file, a steady, unsettling escalation of the veteran's warped mindset. There's no supernatural hook, no masked slasher to hide behind. The danger here is painfully human. Costello hints at the character's war trauma without ever fully explaining it, leaving the audience to fill in the blanks with their own unease. When Forced Entry hit grindhouse theaters, it wasn't met with applause. It was met with stunned silence and the occasional walkout. Yet it built a reputation among exploitation fans for its ability to make viewers squirm without resorting to big-budget tricks. In many ways, it's a reflection of the 1970s itself, a decade wrestling with the fallout of war, the collapse of trust in authority, and the creeping sense that danger wasn't always lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes it was right there, in the daylight, pumping your gas. Forced Entry isn't polished, it isn't pretty, and it isn't trying to be. What it is a grimy, unflinching slice of American exploitation that refuses to look away from the worst parts of its own reality. 10. The Candy Snatchers, 1973. If there's a Mount Rushmore of grimy 70s exploitation, The Candy Snatchers deserves a spot. It opens with a bold daylight kidnapping. 3 criminals abduct a teenage girl and bury her alive in a makeshift coffin, planning to ransom her for diamonds from her father. What follows is a tense, claustrophobic spiral where every plan unravels in the worst possible way. Shot on a modest budget, the film wrings suspense from its limited settings. The buried alive sequences are stomach-turning, not because of gore, but because of the slow, suffocating panic. The criminals are a mismatched crew, greedy, impulsive, and constantly turning on each other, which means the real danger often comes from within their own group. Adding another layer of unease is the fact that help could arrive at any moment, but doesn't. Bystanders are oblivious, and when someone finally does figure out what's happening, their motives are just as questionable as the kidnappers. When it first hit theaters, the Candy Snatchers didn't make a big splash, but over time, it's become a cult favorite for fans who appreciate its mix of suspense, cynicism, and unapologetic grit. There's no Hollywood polish here, just a slow, tense march toward a finale that refuses to offer comfort. 11. Sweetback audacity. Song, 1971. Melvin Van Peebles didn't just make a movie with Sweetback's audacity song, he detonated a cultural bomb. Self-financed and shot guerrilla style, it tells the story of a man on the run after defending a black activist from police brutality. What follows is a relentless chase through urban backstreets, desert stretches, and every obstacle 70s America could throw in his way. From the opening moments, it's clear this isn't studio fare. The editing is jagged, the imagery is raw, and the soundtrack, courtesy of a then-unknown Earth, Wind and Fire, pulses with defiance. Van Peebles pushed every boundary he could, both in terms of content and in the way he broke from traditional narrative structure. Mainstream critics didn't know what to do with it. Some dismissed it as chaotic, while others recognized it as a rallying cry for independent filmmaking and the emerging blaxploitation movement. Audiences, however, turned it into a box office success, proving there was a hungry market for stories told outside the Hollywood system. What's most striking about Sweetback is its refusal to compromise. It's not neat, it's not safe, and it doesn't care if you're comfortable. It's a cinematic middle finger to the status quo, and it changed American film forever. 12th, Last House on Dead End Street, 1977. Few exploitation films wear their grime like a badge of honor the way Last House on Dead End Street does. Directed by Roger Watkins, this underground oddity sat unreleased for years, with rumors swirling about lost reels and even darker content left on the cutting room floor. When it finally surfaced, it was unlike anything else, a bleak, surreal story about a recently released ex-con who decides to make snuff films for profit. The production is a case study in guerrilla filmmaking. Shot on 16mm with borrowed equipment, it has the jittery, unstable look of a nightmare caught on home movie stock. Lighting is inconsistent, audio drops in and out, and the acting swings from monotone to manic. All of that somehow works in its favor, making it feel dangerous in a way a slicker production never could. The violence, when it comes, is shocking not just for what's shown, but for how it's shown. Slow, methodical, and claustrophobic. It's less about jump scares and more about building a sense of inescapable doom. For years, Last House on Dead End Street was the stuff of VHS legend, whispered about in collector circles and passed around in grainy copies. It's not a crowd pleaser, and it's certainly not for casual viewing, but it remains one of the purest examples of 70s exploitation, a film that feels like it. Shouldn't exist, yet refuses to disappear. 13. Rolling Thunder, 1977. At first glance, Rolling Thunder looks like a gritty revenge thriller in the vein of Death Wish. And it is, but it's also a slow-burn character study about a Vietnam veteran trying to reintegrate into a society that's moved on without him. Directed by John Flynn and written by Paul Schrader, it stars William Devane as Major Charles Rain, a man who returns home to a hero's welcome and a pile of unresolved trauma. When a violent robbery shatters his fragile domestic life, René sets out for retribution. The setup is familiar, but the execution is pure 70s grit. Flynn takes his time, letting the tension simmer before exploding into bursts of shocking violence. Devane plays René with quiet intensity, making him both sympathetic and unsettling. Tommy Lee Jones, in an early role, matches that energy as a fellow vet who's more than willing to help settle the score. Unlike many revenge flicks of the time, Rolling Thunder doesn't glamorize the payback. The violence is ugly, the victory's hollow. It's cathartic, but only in the way pulling a thorn is cathartic, the wound's still there afterward. Though it underperformed at the box office, the film developed a loyal following, especially among filmmakers. Quentin Tarantino has called it one of his favorites, which should tell you everything you need to know about its place in exploitation history. And there you have it, 13 slabs of pure, unfiltered 70s exploitation grit. These movies didn't just push boundaries. They tore them down, set them on fire, and filmed the whole thing. Some are shocking, some are brilliant, and some are a little bit of both. Which ones have you seen, and which are you brave enough to watch next? Drop your picks in the comments, hit that like button, and keep the grindhouse spirit alive.